It's strange, isn't it? The things we do for those we love. The lengths we'll go, the sacrifices we make, and the things we're willing to give up for the ones who mean the most to us. My name is Eleanor Hayes, and I've spent my life sewing, stitching together not just fabric, but the very fabric of my family's existence. I've made every meal with love, every hem with care, and every moment I've spent with my son Julian has been a stitch of sacrifice. My hands are not just old, they are filled with history. They carry the weight of love, of regret, and now of something much darker. I've spent my life being what everyone else needed me to be. Quiet, steady, dependable. It's been a good life, though not the kind of life that is ever recognized by the world. I gave my son everything. Every penny I earned was for his future. Every sleepless night, every missed moment, was so that he could have a better life than I ever did. And that's what it was all for, wasn't it? His success, his happiness. But now I understand that I was never truly seen. No, not really. It all came crashing down one cold October evening when I received that phone call. It wasn't Julian's voice on the other end. It was Vivian, his wife, the woman who's always treated me like a relic of the past, a piece of old furniture that no one knows quite what to do with. Her voice was tight, strained. "Eleanor, you need to come to the hospital. It's Julian." The words hit me like a shockwave, a cold terror gripping my heart. I don't remember how I got there, but in less than an hour, I found myself in a sterile private hospital room where Julian lay. His face was pale, his body too still. And Vivian, standing by the window, staring out into the city skyline, not even looking at him. Her indifference was a slap in the face, but the words that followed were the ones that tore through me, leaving me breathless. "End-stage renal disease," the doctor said. "Kidney failure. He needs a transplant." I didn't hesitate. "Test me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My son, the boy I had given everything to, now needed me in the most profound way possible. The tests came back and I was a match, a perfect match. The doctors called it a 1 in a million chance. Called it destiny. I had never questioned it. This was my son. I would give him anything. And I did. I gave him my kidney. The surgery was a success. My son, the one I had raised with every ounce of my being, now had a second chance at life, thanks to me. And yet I felt an odd sense of disconnection. My body was recovering, but my heart was sinking. Not because of the pain or the exhaustion from the procedure. No, it was something worse. It was the realization that something had shifted, something I had not expected. After the surgery, Vivian insisted that I recover at their condo. "It makes more sense," she said, her voice impersonal as ever. "It's more efficient." Efficient. The word rang in my ears, hollow and detached. I agreed, of course. What else could I do? But the coldness of their world, the sleek minimalism of their condo, made me feel like an outsider in my own son's life. Julian, my son, who I had given everything to, barely looked at me. He was polite, distant, as though the most intimate, selfless act I had ever done was nothing more than an obligation to him. He didn't thank me. He didn't even seem to acknowledge what I had done for him. And then it happened. A week into my stay at their condo, as I shuffled down the hallway in search of water, I overheard their conversation. I heard Vivian's voice, sharp and laced with venom. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," she said. "She's always there. The nurse, the pills, the shuffling. My home has become a convalescent home. When is she leaving?" And Julian's voice, that voice I had loved and cared for all my life, responded with a sigh. "I know, but it's done now. It's a transaction. Now she's finally been useful." Useful. I stood frozen, my heart shattering in a way I didn't know it could. Useful. That's all I had been. A tool to save his life. A tool to be disposed of once the job was done. The love, the sacrifices, the years of putting his needs before my own, all of it reduced to a cold, calculated transaction, had been useful. I turned and walked back to my room, my body trembling not from the pain of recovery, but from the weight of betrayal. The next few days passed in a blur. I was polite, smiled. I played the role of the obedient, loving mother. But inside something had changed. The woman who had given everything for her son, the woman who had done everything out of love, was gone. In her place, a new woman emerged. A woman who understood the language of transactions. A woman who had been dismissed as a tool. And now, she would make them pay for it. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The stage had been set, and I was about to sew myself into the very fabric of their lives. They thought they had used me, but they hadn't realized the thread I was about to pull. And once I started, there would be no going back. I never expected gratitude. Not the kind that was loud, not the kind that made a spectacle of itself. I never expected grand speeches or celebrations. But I did expect something more than what I received. After I gave my son Julian a part of myself, something no one can ever give back, not ever, something shifted and I saw it clearly. It was in the air, thick and suffocating. It was a disconnection I had never felt before, and it left a bitter taste in my mouth, deeper than any physical ache. It started with the recovery. After the surgery, I was moved to their condo, just as Vivian had planned. It was a nice place. Cold, impersonal, a place where nothing felt lived in. The kind of place where everything is too perfect, too pristine. Where even the chairs seemed to belong to a photo shoot rather than to someone who actually lived there. It was a world far removed from the one I had known, a world where my every breath seemed out of place. Julian, my son, my only child, had become a stranger. He was distant, too distant. He visited me, yes, but his eyes didn't meet mine the way they used to. They were polite, yes, but there was a coldness behind them, as though he were managing a task rather than spending time with his mother. His smile was forced, as though he were simply fulfilling a role in a play that neither of us wanted to act in. Every time I tried to thank him, to speak of the sacrifice, to mention what I had given him, his face would shift. His eyes would look away. It was like I was invisible to him, only useful in this one way. The rest, nothing. Vivian, on the other hand, continued her cold efficiency. She had arranged everything perfectly, of course. Appointments with the nurse, meals, medicine. But I saw through it. Her care wasn't about love, about concern. It was about maintaining an image. An image of the perfect daughter-in-law. The one who was doing everything she could for her elderly mother-in-law. She never showed real tenderness. She wasn't interested in me, not really. She was only interested in how things looked. And the worst part, it was that every time I tried to show them my appreciation, my gratitude for the life I had saved, they both recoiled. They weren't thankful. They weren't even pretending to be thankful. Their politeness was nothing more than a mask. It happened one night, just a few days after the surgery, when I was lying in bed, my body aching but my mind still sharp. I had been sleeping poorly, waking up in fits and starts. My medication made me dizzy, and the pain in my side wasn't helping matters. But I wasn't asleep when I overheard them. I wasn't asleep when Vivian's sharp voice cut through the quiet of the hallway. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," she said, her voice tight with irritation. "She's always there. The nurse, the pills, the shuffling. It's like she's taking up all the space in my life." And Julian, my son, my flesh and blood, replied with a sigh. His voice colder than I had ever heard it. "I know. It's almost over, just another week or so." Their words felt like knives in my chest, but it wasn't the words that hurt the most. It was the tone, the coldness with which they spoke. They weren't talking about me as if I was a mother, a person who had given up part of herself for the sake of love. No. They were talking about me as if I was a burden, a temporary inconvenience that would soon be gone. "It's done now," Julian continued. "The transaction is complete. Now she's finally been useful." Useful. The word echoed in my ears, louder than any noise. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped their hands around my heart and squeezed. Useful. That's all I had been. I wasn't a mother who had given everything for her son. I wasn't a woman who had sacrificed a part of herself to save the life of the person she loved most. No, I was just a tool. A tool to be discarded when no longer needed. A tool to be used. I stayed still in my bed, my hands gripping the sheets as I processed what I had just heard. I had given Julian a kidney, a part of myself that no one could ever repay. And what did I get in return? Cold indifference. A transactional relationship. A convenient act of usefulness that they could dispose of once the job was done. It wasn't the betrayal that struck me the hardest. It was the realization of how small I had become in their eyes. How easily they had dismissed me as something to be discarded once I had fulfilled my purpose. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't see the truth of how they truly saw me. But I did. And in that moment something inside me changed. I realized that if they thought I was done, if they thought I was no longer needed, they were wrong. I still had a purpose. I still had the power to make them see what they had done. And I would teach them, quietly, methodically, without them even realizing it. No, I wouldn't confront them right away. That would be too easy. I wouldn't shout at them or demand an apology. Well, what I would do was far more effective. I would make them live with their mistake. I would make them regret treating me like a tool, a disposable object. And I would do it in a way they could never escape. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And soon they would learn that the story they thought they had written, the story of their perfect, successful lives, was about to be rewritten. And I would be the one holding the pen. The world they had built around themselves, glossy, sleek, perfectly put together, was nothing more than a fragile mask, a mask that only covered the darkness of what lay beneath. And as I lay in their luxury condo, recovering from the surgery I had undergone to save the life of my son, I couldn't help but feel how deeply hollow that mask was. The coldness I felt from both of them, their mechanical politeness, their forced gratitude, gnawed at me, made my skin crawl. But I wasn't angry. Not yet. And I wasn't sad. No, what I felt was a kind of calm, the kind that only comes when you realize that the most powerful weapon is silence. They thought I was just an old woman, dependent and weak, hanging on for the sake of her last few days. They thought they could simply finish the transaction, my kidney for Julian's life, and be done with it. But I was no longer the woman they saw me as. I had never been just a tool. I was a woman who had survived more than they could ever understand. And now, I would show them that my silence would be the most deafening thing they would ever hear. I spent days in that condo watching, listening, gathering. I didn't speak much, not to them. I didn't force conversation. I wasn't the one trying to connect. Instead, I let them play their roles, their perfectly practiced parts in this family charade. I listened to Vivian's empty chatter, to Julian's polite questions, to their cold, detached kindness. I began to understand their patterns, to see the delicate cracks in their well-crafted life. Every move they made, every word they spoke, I analyzed. I studied their habits, their routines, the places they went, the things they valued. It was a sick kind of observation, yes, but I wasn't doing it for sport. I was doing it to understand the real story, the one they were so desperate to keep hidden beneath the layers of their manufactured image. And then, one evening, when I felt their attention on me had begun to dissipate again, I decided it was time to make my first move. Not a direct confrontation. Not yet. That would come later, but not now. This had to be a quiet step, one they wouldn't even notice until it was far too late. I wrote a letter. It wasn't just any letter. This letter was a carefully woven tapestry of words, a story of my self-sacrifice, of the love I had given, and of the deep, undeniable truth about what I had done for them. Every detail, from the medical costs to the emotional toll of the process, was written with precision. I wrote not only for Julian and Vivian to read, but for everyone who would hear my story. This was the first thread in my plan. The first stitch that would begin to unravel the world they had so carefully built. I knew exactly who to send it to. There was a local journalist, Mary Harris, known for her human interest stories. Stories about people who had sacrificed and struggled. Stories that touched the heart of the city. I had read her work for years, and I knew she was the perfect person to tell my story. She wasn't just anyone. She was the conduit that would spread my story far beyond the cold walls of their condo. She would help me shine a light on what they had done. I sent the letter to her, carefully addressing it, sealing the envelope with a calm that had been born from months of quiet observation. I knew that once Mary received it, my story would no longer be just mine. It would belong to the world. In the days that followed, nothing changed on the surface. Julian continued his cold, polite visits. Vivian continued with her business-like efficiency, checking in only when necessary, making sure I had everything I needed, just as she had planned. But beneath it all, I could feel a quiet shift. It was like the calm before a storm, the moment right before a needle pulls the last thread, and the whole fabric of their lives starts to unravel. A week later I got the call from Mary Harris. "Hello, is this Eleanor Hayes?" Her voice was warm, professional, exactly what I expected. "This is she," I replied, my voice steady. "I received your letter," she said. "It was one of the most moving stories I've read in a long time. I would love to do a piece on you. Would you be open to a visit?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it. This was it. The first piece of my plan was in motion. "I would be honored," I said, my voice soft, but the satisfaction of knowing the first stitch had been made almost brought me to tears. Not of sorrow, but of anticipation. A few days later, Mary arrived at my house in South Philadelphia. She was everything I had hoped for: sharp, empathetic, and deeply interested in my story. She didn't look at me with the eyes of an outsider or a charity case, as I had so often felt from Julian and Vivian. She looked at me like someone who understood. And when she spoke to me, she didn't just hear words. She heard me. We spent hours together. She took photographs of my hands, my sewing machine, the cluttered room I called home. We talked about my life as a seamstress, about my love for Julian, about the sacrifice I had made. I spoke of the long years I had spent raising him, working endlessly to make sure he had what he needed, and how I thought my sacrifice would bring us closer. Mary was moved, and I could see it in her eyes. She didn't say it directly, but I knew that the story she would write wouldn't be just about my kidney. It would be about the love, the pain, and the rejection that followed. It would be the story of a mother who had given all, only to find that she was no longer wanted. A few days later, the story was published. It was beautiful. The headline alone brought tears to my eyes. "The Seamstress's Gift, a Mother's Love That Saved Her Son." The piece was well written, full of emotion, full of truth, and it captured everything I had given to them, everything I had sacrificed. There, for all the city to see, was my love, my pain, my journey. And when Julian saw it, when he saw what I had done, what I had made of their story, I knew that he would be trapped in a narrative he couldn't escape. He would be forced to acknowledge it. He would be forced to live with it. And, just like the fabric I had worked with all my life, I would stitch myself so deeply into their world that they could never undo what I had done. But the most beautiful part: they had no idea what was coming next. I've learned one thing in this life: truth cannot be hidden forever, no matter how much we try. And sometimes the truth is the most powerful weapon we have. When I wrote that letter to the newspaper, I wasn't just seeking revenge. I wasn't just looking for someone to hear my pain, to validate the years of self-sacrifice I had given to my son. No, I had something much bigger in mind. I was changing the narrative. I was no longer going to be the background figure in their story. I wasn't going to let them control how the world saw me anymore. The letter was my first step. But I wasn't sure if they'd understand the magnitude of what I was doing. I wasn't sure they would even see me as anything more than a tool. But I was ready to take the consequences of what was coming. As I waited, each day felt shorter, like a countdown, until the truth would be revealed, and the carefully curated world they had built would begin to show cracks. I continued to watch them, to study their every movement. Julian and Vivian went on with their lives, as though nothing had changed. They lived in their perfect little world, oblivious to the storm that was quietly gathering strength around them. Their lives, carefully planned, meticulously curated, were as fake as their smiles. They didn't notice me anymore, not really. To them, I was a piece of furniture, something to be tolerated perhaps, but nothing more. And I knew that, with each passing day, I was becoming less of a part of their narrative, and more of a force that would eventually disrupt it. It was 2 weeks after I had sent that letter that I finally received the call. It was from Mary Harris, the journalist. Her voice was warm, almost apologetic. She had read my story, and she was deeply moved. "Eleanor, I would love to meet with you," she said. "I think your story needs to be shared, and I'd love to tell it. I think it will make a huge impact." I could hear the excitement in her voice, and I knew at that moment that the change had already begun. I had no intention of revealing everything just yet. My emotions, my pain, those things would stay inside me, hidden for now. But this was my chance. The world would soon hear what had really happened, and they would have to face the consequences. When Mary arrived at my house, I was calm. I was quiet, measured. I had decided that I would not confront them with anger. Anger wouldn't work. They didn't deserve that kind of response from me. What they needed, what I needed, was to take back the narrative with dignity. And that was exactly what I was going to do. I didn't mention the coldness in their voices, the way they had treated me like a tool once my kidney had been transplanted into Julian's body. I didn't speak about their indifference, their lack of gratitude. I simply told my story. I told her about the years I had spent working, saving, sacrificing to make sure my son had the life I couldn't afford. I told her about my love for him, about the kidney I gave to him without hesitation, without any thought of what it might cost me. I spoke of the deep, unshakable bond between a mother and her child, and of the lengths a mother will go to when the life of her child is in jeopardy. I didn't speak of my pain. I didn't tell her how I felt discarded, how I was ignored, how my sacrifice had been reduced to a mere transaction. Instead, I told her of my love, of my sacrifice, of the woman I had been and the woman I was becoming. A woman who would no longer sit quietly by. A woman who would no longer be invisible. When Mary left, I knew I had done what needed to be done. I had given her my truth, and that truth would soon be out in the world for all to see. And when Julian and Vivian saw it, they would understand the depth of what they had done. I wasn't just a mother. I was a woman who had loved deeply, who had given all, and who would no longer remain in the shadows of their perfect lives. The article came out a few days later. It was everything I had hoped for. The headline read, "The Silent Sacrifice, A Mother's Love and the Gift of Life." It was a full-page spread in the lifestyle section, complete with photographs of me sitting at my sewing machine, my hands gnarled and worn, but steady and strong. The article captured my life, my story, perfectly. When Julian saw it, I knew it would crush him. Not because of the public attention, but because he would have to confront the truth. He would have to admit that he had used me, that his indifference had come at a high cost. And he would have to reckon with the fact that I had turned the tables. Now, it was his turn to live with the consequences of his actions. I could already hear the phone call coming. His strained voice, the tightness in his words. "Mother, have you seen the paper?" he would ask. He would try to sound calm, but I would hear the panic in his voice. I knew him too well. "Of course," I'd say. "Isn't it lovely? Mary did such a good job with the story. I'm glad you liked it." But I would know. I would know that the game had changed. They could never erase me again. I was part of their story now, and I would be there in every public narrative, in every conversation. They could no longer pretend I didn't exist. They had no idea what they were in for. The world would now see the truth, and the truth would not let them hide. I wasn't just a mother. I was a force. The world had shifted, just as I had planned, and I could feel it in the air around me. It wasn't just the article or the attention. It wasn't even the small victory of finally having my story told. It was something deeper. I had changed the narrative. I had rewritten it in a way that no one could ignore. I, Lilia Dawson, had moved from the shadow of my family's life and into the spotlight, not as a victim but as a woman who had taken control of her own story. I had been quiet for so long. But now, with each word I spoke, each truth I revealed, I was shaking the very foundation of the life they thought they had built. I wasn't just a mother. I was more than that. I was the woman who had given everything, even when no one had asked me to. I was the woman they had tried to forget, but now they couldn't escape. When Mary Harris came to visit me, I was ready. She was quick to notice the depth of my story. "Your story is incredible," she said. "But it needs more. I want to know the full picture. What made you do this? How did it feel to make such a sacrifice? I spoke to her without hesitation, without a single tear or unnecessary emotion. I was calm, controlled, even detached. There was no need for anger or bitterness. I didn't need to say anything cruel or vindictive. I simply told my truth as plainly as I could. I talked about the love I had for Julian, the sacrifices I had made for him. I told her how I had been invisible to them, how my efforts had been ignored once the transplant was over. I didn't need to mention their lack of gratitude. I didn't need to point out how they had used me like a tool, taking my kidney as if it were nothing more than a service rendered. I didn't need to say that they had never once thought to thank me, never once considered the weight of what I had given. The silence between my words spoke volumes. As the interview continued, I felt a strange sense of control that I had never felt before. I wasn't the fragile, old woman they had painted me to be. I was not just a mother who had given her son a second chance at life. I was a woman who had seen the cold, hard truth of how they had treated me, and now I was ready to make sure everyone else could see it too. I didn't need to make them look bad. They were already doing it for me. All I had to do was tell my story to show the world who I was and what I had done. And when Mary's article came out, everything changed. The headline read, "The Silent Sacrifice, a Mother's Love That Saved Her Son." It was perfect. It wasn't just a story about me. It was a story about my family's betrayal, about the price of love and the cost of silence. The article made waves. People started calling me, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years, old friends, even strangers. They told me how much my story had moved them. It wasn't just the sacrifice. It was the truth, the cold, undeniable truth. The world finally saw me for who I was. But the most significant part, Julian saw it too. The phone call came shortly after the article was published. It was Julian. His voice was tight, his words strained. "Mother, have you seen the paper?" he asked. "Of course," I replied, my tone soft. "Isn't it lovely? I'm so glad Mary did such a good job with the story." "Lovely," he repeated, his voice rising with barely concealed frustration. It's all over the place. You told everyone, everything." I could hear him struggling to keep his cool. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to me having control, to me holding the reins of this narrative. He was trapped. He and Vivian were trapped, caught in the web I had carefully spun for them. I didn't say much more. I didn't need to. I let him fume, let the silence stretch between us like a slow-burning fuse. "Look, Julian," I said quietly. "I just wanted the world to know the truth, the whole truth. I never asked for anything. I only wanted to be seen for what I am, a mother who gave everything for her son." There was a long pause, and then he muttered something I couldn't quite hear. "We'll talk later," he said before hanging up. I knew what that call meant. It meant the walls were closing in. It meant the perfect life they had crafted, the life they had worked so hard to build, the life that excluded me, the life they had carefully polished for the world, was beginning to crack. The public image they had spent so long cultivating was now shattered. They couldn't escape it. They couldn't undo what had been done. And it wasn't just the story in the paper. It was everything that followed. The phone calls from well-meaning acquaintances, the questions from strangers, the whispers in the streets. All of it worked together like a tidal wave, slowly washing away their perfect facade. The next public moment was their most humiliating yet. The local hospital, where my transplant had taken place, decided to honor Julian at their annual fundraiser. He was to receive an award for his advocacy work on organ donation. And, of course, they wanted me there, the mother who had made the ultimate sacrifice. I knew this was coming, and I had prepared for it. I had made sure they couldn't avoid it. I had called in favors, orchestrated my own recognition. And now the world would see them, my son and his wife, forced to sit next to me to pretend that everything was fine, to smile for the cameras and pretend to be a loving, supportive family. But they were trapped in their own lie. They had to play along. They had no choice. That night at the fundraiser I was the star. I was the one everyone wanted to talk to, the one everyone wanted to congratulate. I stood there, poised and composed, while Julian and Vivian, trapped in their roles, smiled through clenched teeth. They were the perfect image of a family in crisis, too proud to admit the truth, too broken to escape it. And as the night wore on, I watched them struggle to keep up their act, to maintain their perfect image in front of the world. They had no idea how far I had gone, how far I was willing to go to make sure they could never escape the truth. This was my revenge, not in the form of destruction, but in the form of undeniable truth. And now they would live with it, forever. It was like stepping into a world that no longer belonged to them, no longer theirs to control. I, Lilia Dawson, had become a fixture in the story they had tried so hard to erase. No longer the fragile woman who had given everything, I was now the woman who had taken the power back. And the truth was, this was only the beginning. The article had spread like wildfire. The interviews, the public appearances. I was no longer just a footnote in their lives. My story had become their story, and it had been told in the brightest lights, for the world to see. As the days went on, I felt my reputation return. The support I received from strangers, from old friends, even from people who had never known me, was overwhelming. They didn't just see the sacrifice I had made. They saw the strength in my words, the quiet power behind every letter I had written, every interview I had given. And they understood. Meanwhile, Derek and Vivian, with their polished lives and perfect images, began to feel the weight of their own creation. They had been forced to step into a world they had always tried to keep clean, untouched by anything real. And now they couldn't escape it. They were trapped by their own lies. The moment they had tried to control, to twist in their favor, was now slipping through their fingers. The grand moment arrived. The annual Philadelphia Hospital Charity Ball. It was the event of the year, where the city's elite gathered to celebrate their most prestigious achievements, where donations were made and legacies were born. As planned, Derek was to receive the Heroism and Selflessness Award for his contributions to organ donation, an award that he had done nothing to deserve. The truth was, the only reason he was getting this award was because I had given him my kidney. It was my act of selflessness that had saved his life, not his so-called advocacy. I knew what was coming. I knew that they couldn't refuse the spotlight any longer. They had been forced to accept the consequences of their actions. And the greatest irony of all, Derek, the son who had used me, the son who had treated my sacrifice like a mere transaction, was about to accept an award for it, for all the world to see. On the night of the ball, I arrived in a simple navy blue dress that I had sewn myself. It wasn't extravagant, it wasn't flashy, but it was real, just like me. The dress fit perfectly, the fabric smooth and soft against my skin. I was calm. My heart didn't race. I knew exactly what was about to happen, and I was ready for it. I had already won. When I stepped onto that stage, the lights blinding me for a moment, I felt a strange sense of peace. The applause was deafening. The cameras flashed, and I stood there, silently absorbing the moment. The award was for Derek, of course. He would be the one to stand there and take credit, as though his achievements had been all his own. But it was the moment before they called him up that I would never forget. As the presenter introduced Derek, I could feel his discomfort. He was already bracing himself for the weight of the truth to come crashing down on him. His smile, tight and forced, told me everything I needed to know. He knew he was about to be exposed, not for his accomplishments, but for his hypocrisy. The applause continued, but it wasn't for him. It was for the sacrifice, the selflessness that had brought him here, the truth that no one in that room could deny. And then it was my turn. The presenter invited me to the stage. I walked slowly, every step deliberate. I wasn't in a hurry. I had already taken control. I knew what was coming, and they didn't. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady and clear, "I am honored to be here tonight, to be part of this moment, not just as a mother, but as a woman who has given everything for the people she loves." I looked at Derek, standing there, already sweating under the pressure of the spotlight. His hands gripped the podium, his knuckles white. Beside him, Vivian stood stiffly, her smile rigid and frozen. "I am the woman who gave her son a kidney," I continued, "because I loved him. Because I believed that his life was worth saving." The audience was listening now, hanging on my every word. I could see Derek shifting uncomfortably. He knew what was coming. "But there's something you should know," I said, pausing just enough to let the tension fill the room. "That act of love was never acknowledged by the people I thought I could trust. It wasn't just a gift. It was a sacrifice, and that sacrifice was treated like a transaction, something to be disposed of once it was used." I didn't look at Derek. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing down on him. The truth was undeniable now. The audience could see it. They could see what I had been through, and they could see who Derek and Vivian really were. "But tonight," I said, my voice rising slightly, "I stand before you not as a victim, but as a woman who has reclaimed her story. I stand here as someone who has taken back what was always mine. And I am proud of what I gave, proud of who I am. This award that Derek is about to receive, it is mine as much as it is his." The room was silent for a moment. The tension was palpable. The audience, who had been applauding moments before, now seemed hesitant. They knew they had just been part of a greater story, one that wasn't about Derek and Vivian's so-called achievements, but about the truth. As Derek took the stage to accept his award, the applause was nowhere near as enthusiastic as it had been before. The mask had slipped, and he knew it. Vivian, too, stood beside him, her smile brittle, her eyes avoiding mine. I returned to my seat, my heart pounding, not from nervousness but from satisfaction. I had done it. I had made them live with the truth. And they would never forget it. Later that night, when the event was over and I had returned to my quiet, humble home, I felt a profound sense of peace. They would never escape what I had done. They would never be able to erase me from their lives again. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a force, a woman who had taken back what was rightfully hers. In the end, they were the ones who had lost. They had tried to hide from the truth, to build a life that excluded me. But now their perfect image had cracked. Their success had been made possible only through my sacrifice, and they could never take that back. The world had seen the truth, and they would have to live with it forever.